and those who will join us will let them join because we have more than a quorum here. So I would, let me read this mandatory introduction. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, on June 16, 2022, then Governor Baker signed into law an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This act includes an extension until March 31st, 2023 of the remote meeting provisions of his March 12th, 2020 executive order. This meeting will be conducted via remote means in accordance with this authorization. So I'll call the meeting to order, and we will grant permission to Westwood Media Center to live stream and record. Does anybody else want to record? Okay, I will, Victoria, are any of the participants online yet so I can welcome them?
Jane and Lou are on. There's also, so Chris Coleman's on as well, and Marianne.
Okay, well, I'd like to, let me welcome them. Chris Coleman, who obviously is the town administrator. Welcome to Marianne LeBlanc, who actually is a unique participant tonight because Marianne was the longest serving chair on the Westwood Finance and Warrant Commission, and now is on the select board. So she clearly has a lot of experience on both sides, and that's very nice. She brings that to the table. Whom else, Victoria, did you mention?
We also have Chris Pfaff.
Chris Pfaff. Chris, welcome, chair of the planning board. And I will. Jane O'Donnell, is Jane there? Welcome, Jane. We all know Jane as our past administrator. And is Lou on yet?
Yes, yes.
Welcome, Lou Rizoli, who will be making a presentation to us on behalf of the Westwood Housing Associates. And have I missed anybody at that point in time? If not, we will recognize them and welcome them as they join the meeting. So what I would like to do now is we can stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Chris, thank you for holding up the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Victoria, would you be kind enough to do the roll call?
Bill.
Here.
Sean Carey.
Here.
Jim. He's on the attendees, and I'm trying to promote him to panelist, but I don't know why it's not working right now. But Jim is here.
Okay,
Lauren.
we'll count you present. Yep.
Here.
Renee.
Here.
Mike.
Here.
Okay. So George Hertz.
Here.
Angela.
Here.
Caitlin.
Here.
George Loughnane.
Present.
George Marone.
Here.
Christina.
Here.
Chris.
Here.
And Sean.
Here.
Okay,
And Alex is not able to attend tonight, correct?
correct.
All right, well, thank you all for attending. First presenter we have will be Lou Rizoli and along with Jane O'Donnell. The reason I asked Lou to come in is to give us an overview of what Westwood has done with affordable housing. And I think as the state has recognized, we're somewhat unique that we have spread out our affordable housing units throughout town. And most towns, and I think you're all well aware of it, they cluster their affordable housing and it becomes very recognizable what they are rather than integrating them into the community. And I know the town has tried to support this process to help with some of the rehabilitation and maintenance of these homes. But I thought, especially for the new members, it would be very useful if Lou sort of gave us an overview of what they've accomplished and what their goals are. And then we could open it up to questions. So can you let Lou in and Jane in? And I think,
Lou is in. I added Jane too.
okay, well, if Lou wants to start, and I guess unmute him and he can start.
Oh. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I am happy to be here this evening to go over a little bit of the history of Westwood Housing Authority and Westwood Affordable Housing Associates. I go back to 1986 when this started, so I could really bore everyone and put you to sleep for the next 4 hours or something, giving you go back with it. But I will not do that, and I will try to summarize where we are, and quite frankly, how proud of the town that I am. So around 1986, a developer came in and wanted to put 300 condominiums behind Westwood Lodge. At that particular time, condominiums were not allowed in Westwood. And he came in under, I know that everyone's familiar with it, under the Chapter 40B general laws, because Westwood did not have 10% in affordable housing. And it was all new to the people in the town. I had somewhat of a background for it because at that time I was the chief counsel of the House of Representatives. But anyway, what happened was everybody was kind of surprised when I told them that it didn't matter that we didn't allow condos by our zoning. And it didn't matter that the schools were going to be overrun with students, and it didn't matter that public safety was going to increase, and it didn't matter that it was going to have a drain on our water and sewer. If the town doesn't have 10% in affordable housing, then we're subject to a unfriendly Chapter 40B. What happened was the town formed the Westwood Housing Committee, of which I was chair. And then the Department of Housing and Community Development said, well, you're one of the few towns that doesn't have a housing authority. And by the way, you say you have 7% of your housing is affordable, but it's all elderly. You don't have any family affordable housing in the town. And we began to look at it and said, uh-oh, this isn't going to go over big. We better work with the developer. So we formed the housing authority in the 1988 town meeting. And then the developer who wanted to put up 300 condos decided that the better way to do it was to work with the town, and the Department of Housing and Community Development had just come out with a plan. This was like 1990, late 80s, called the LIP program, which was the local initiative program, where the developer and the town go in as co-applicants. And so the town decided that they would go in and put 100 single family units there, and 75 would be market rate and 25 would be affordable. And that's Chase Estates. And then there's a development very similar to that next to the Hanlon School that had a smaller number. I think it's 17 market rate and 8 affordable. But what happened was it took an extra couple of years. So this is like 1990, maybe 89, 90. So by the time that the project got ready to be developed, the developer came in and said to us, well, the real estate market has really picked up in all over the place. And so we signed something with the town saying that we would sell the market rate units for between 500,000 and 600,000. Remember, this is, the early 90s. And we would like to now, instead of having 500,000 to 600,000, we'd like to go from 700,000 to 800,000. But they needed the town's approval. And Bob Buick was the chair of the Board of Selectmen at that time. And I worked very closely with him, and he said to me, "What do you think we should do, Lou?" And I said, "Bob, this is one time, and it may be the only time, that you are totally in driver's seat. If you say no, they have to sell the market rate units for between 500,000 and 600,000. If you say yes, they're going to be able to sell them with the 700 to 800, and obviously you have to sign some documentation." And he said, "Well, what should we do?" And I said, "Let's get something for it. Let's start an affordable housing trust fund in the town and have the developer come and give us linkage fees." So I sat down with them. Anyway, we came up and we said, for every market rate unit that you're going to sell, you give us $10,000. Well, that didn't sit well with the developer. They came back and said, "Well, reluctantly, we'll give you 5,000 for every one that we sell." And surprise, surprise, we settled at 7,500. So each one of the market rate units, for 75 of them, the town got $7,500. So I, at that point, said, there's no sense in putting this money into the housing fund, into the housing authority, because that's money that comes in from the state. And we're going to be under a lot of restrictions by the state anyway. If you want, I'll set up a nonprofit 501c3 corporation, and we can take the money that the developer gives us and put it in there, and then start to develop some affordable housing. And so that's what we did, and that's where WAHA came. So this is 1994 that we set up this nonprofit, and then excuse me, in that year we bought a house down on Grafton Avenue, right, a two-family house right next to the train station. Now, I don't want to go into details of the houses that we have, but I think everybody knows there's at least one down there that's one of the affordable ones. It's a great location. 2-minute walk to the train, 5-minute walk to the center of Islington. And that's how WAHA started. And I'm proud to say that we've come a long way. And we now have 14 housing units that are all from WAHA. We still haven't got any money from the state, and I'm not anxious to get it, because they will put all sorts of restrictions on it. And as your chairman said, it'll be an area, and they'll say, "Okay, we want you to put 50 units in there, and they'll all be affordable." And everyone will look and say, "That's where the affordables are." We have them spread all over town, and that's the way I think most the people in the town like it, the neighbors like it, and we have 6 single-family houses, and then we have 4 two-family houses, and that's how we come up with our 14 units that are there.
Lou, let me ask you this question.
Sure.
How do we support these houses on an ongoing basis in terms of maintenance and upkeep?
Excellent question, Judge. We have 3 of the houses that we had were donated to WAHA, and you take them. Anyone who wants to donate houses, we're not going to say no, but they weren't in the greatest shape in the world, and so we had to do some improvements to them. And there were in 2017 there was a capital project put through that the FinCom had voted on for the last 5 years for $150,000 for each of the years, and we're finished with it now. So for the last 5 years, we've had 150,000 has come in for renovations to these houses, and we're just about done. Of course, just like all of our houses, there's, the things that we're going to have to do, the boiler, the furnace goes, or, the stairs outside or whatever. So we do have an ongoing, need for repairs and maintenance, but the big one, where especially these 3 houses that we had to spend some money on, thank goodness the town was very generous and gave us the money to do the renovations for them. So we're pretty much caught up, Judge, except for the general maintenance that we all have to go through.
Okay. All right. Does Lou, I think it's very impressive what you've done. Let me just, is there anything else you want to say before I open it up to questions?
No. I mean, they other than I suppose, I think you may have seen it. We're actually kind of proud of this, that we had one of our members of WAHA, Kathy Shinopoulos, and Jane O'Donnell, of course, who you're all familiar with, is doing her great work with us that she did with you and has continued on with us. So we've put a history of it online. So anyone who wants to know about Westwood Housing Authority and WAHA, they can go on and read a brief history of it.
Okay, so with that, are there any questions that FinCom members would like to ask at this point in time? Chris, I'm normally let you be the hand recognizer, but I saw Mr. Ferrara put his hand and then you. So let's go with Jim Ferrara first.
Yeah, I was just going to tell you, George, that Jim had his hand up.
Okay. All right, I'll let you control that. Okay, Mr. Parita,
Yep.
thank you.
We're all on the same page. Sorry, I'm late. Little technical difficulty over here. So I'm sorry I missed your presentation, but you had mentioned that there is money available from the state, but you don't want to have strings attached. Your subsidized housing, what type of strings attached are you referring to?
I'm more, honestly, Jim, we've never come close to getting any of it. It's large sums of money that they will give to various communities, and they will pretty much dictate that you have to put up, like I just gave it as an example, 50 affordable units, and they'll all be in one place. Nobody's been knocking down our door saying, by the way, the state's got extra money here for you, but that is one of the that's one of the things that we have stayed away from, because we think we have more control over it, and we don't have the stigma of that's where they live.
I don't think there's any stigma attached. I know the state has money for subsidized housing. I was on the Arlington Housing Authority for 7 years, and we were constantly applying and receiving amount to upgrade and improve your housing stock. Excuse me. Have you been applying at all, or are you just avoiding that?
We have not applied, and I don't think we would be eligible for it because they were not housing authority units that were put up. It's with a WAHA, which is a nonprofit. So I may be wrong. I don't believe that the state has given money to any nonprofit.
WAHA is an extension of the Westwood Housing Authority. Is that not correct?
Yes.
So why can't you apply under the Westwood Housing Authority instead of just WAHA?
Because all of the units are owned by WAHA. They're not owned by the Housing Authority.
And what was, I missed that part of the presentation. What was the purpose of that?
The town meeting in 1988 approved of the Westwood Housing Authority. I was on it, been on it for years, and we applied to the state at the beginning because we didn't have any money, and we were not given any money. The state was looking to give it to more or less cities.
Right, but You created the Westwood Housing Authority and then you created WAHA, the nonprofit. What was the purpose of creating the nonprofit to venture out from the housing authority?
Because we have gotten this money wasn't coming from the state, it was coming from developer. So there's no need of putting it into the Westwood Housing Authority when we could have put it into a nonprofit that the town would have complete control over. I
But
mean,
now
we
has
have to
that
go-
handcuffed you by shutting off resources from the state?
absolutely not.
But you just said
We've-
you're not applying to the state. You don't think the money's available.
Well, there hasn't been available for quite a while. I can tell you that it did DHCD. That when the last 2 units that we bought and by the way, each one of our units, we get credit for the under the subsidized housing. So we're just a little bit over 10% now. And I'm not sure if it weren't for WAHA, whether we would be there. 'Cause
Yeah,
we
I'm
do
not
have-
questioning the percentage in the subsidized housing. What I'm looking for is other revenue sources for you. I mean, the housing, the town donated 2 houses to you for a total of $1 million, gave $150,000 for the last 5 years. There's some talk about another $50,000. I mean, I feel that the taxpayers are paying twice. And I'd like to see some other avenues of resources opened up for you, other than
Most
going
of,
back to the taxpayers.
Jim,
well,
let me make,
most of it is not, go ahead, I'm sorry.
let me make this suggestion. Since he did do a full presentation, I'm sorry you missed it. Why don't we do this? I think you're raising a question of whether or not there are alternative revenue sources that the town ought to look at. So I think that's something we can pursue as part of our normal deliberations, because we are over right now the 10% threshold. And I think any development that comes in town must have at least 20% affordable housing built in as part of the development. But I think, Jim, you're raising a legitimate question. But my suggestion is, let's deal with that in the normal process we go through as we put our recommendations together for town meeting, if that's okay. So
Fair
with
enough.
that, good enough? Okay, so any other questions for Lou?
If I could just judge comment on, I'm not gonna, and I appreciate what you're doing, but I think I heard that Chris Pfaff was here, was the chair of the planning board, and I just need to recognize him and the planning board because they have been very helpful, and that is an additional source. We have as developers come into the town, and they are now having linkage fees go to WAHA. So it's not all of the taxpayers' money. In fact, the majority of what we have has come from in the past from linkage and is continuing to come in from linkage from developers.
Okay, Lou, thank you for that comment. I think we have, Chris-
Angela, why don't you go?
Hi, so my question's around the maintenance and upkeep. And I just wanted to make sure I understood the answer. So there was 150,000 for 5 years that was put into homes that were donated. In terms of homes that, existing homes, right? And the homes that aren't part of the 3 that were donated. Is there a maintenance and upkeep program for homeowners who, may need assistance? And if so, are they aware of what's available to them?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Yes, there is. I mean, first of all, Jane does a great job and she knows all of the tenants and is constantly talking with them. If something goes wrong with their, where they're living, we know about it immediately. I mean, there's this constant communication that goes on. So, if it turns out that the roof leaks or that some of the shingles on top of the roof are blown off in the winter or whatever it is, or the furnace goes, we know about this. There's again, there's 14 units and she's in constant communication with the tenants. Each year they have to be recertified that they meet the income requirements. So, yeah, I mean, there's no list that you say that it's just by the fact that she's talking to these people all the time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
All right, Lou, thank you so very much. And Jane, thank you.
Hey,
And-
George, let me have a question here.
I'm sorry, Chris.
First of all, Jane, it's good to see you.
Great to
Um,
see you guys.
So Lou, Jim was talking to you about the revenue sources, okay?
Yep.
My concern is on the opposite end of that equation. So you've gotten $750,000 of taxpayer money going into the housing associates, the nonprofit, as you describe it.
Yep.
And, you know, I'm not interested in addresses, but my concern is this is all taxpayer money. I think the taxpayers ought to have some kind of feedback as to how that money is spent. Or, you know, what kinds of projects, who did it go to? Who are the contractors? How much for each, you know, if you're paying out more than market rate to replace a roof, then I think the taxpayers ought to know that. Not that you are, but I'd like to see some more specificity as to where that $750,000 has been spent.
I mean, we have a list, and I can have Jane and get it to you, Chris, of, you know, almost the dollar, exactly how much we have spent on each of the houses over the past 5 years. And we're
Well,
happy to.
as I said, I'm not interested in addresses.
Right, no, but I mean, we can give you what we've done, absolutely. I mean, that's all, that's information that's all available. Jane,
Yes.
if you could get that, go ahead, Jane, if you could tell them what you.
Look, Chris, let me make a suggestion. Why don't
Yeah,
we-
that's terrific.
Why don't you review, Jane will send that information to you. Why don't you review that as part of your capital group?
Yep.
Which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and then you can sort of report back to the FinCom Commission on your overview of that. Okay, I think it's an excellent question. And I think it's a good way to approach it through your capital group. And I think that will answer. I know there have been some concerns raised about this by several members in the past. I think that will clarify it. And
That's
it'll give
fair
it
enough.
fair.
Yep.
Okay, are there any other questions? Andrew, are you all set? Because I still see your hand up. You okay? Okay, I can't figure that hand out either. Lou and Jane, thank you so very much, and most appreciated, okay?
All right,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you. If you have
Okay.
any other questions, feel free to get in touch with me.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lou.
Thank you. I think now I believe we have Marianne LeBlanc, and I just want to find out who else is there from the town. I know some of the folks, we've had some flu spreading around town, so I want to make sure, is it just Marianne LeBlanc who's going to go giving an overview? Marianne, are you on board? Are you in with us yet?
Chris Coleman is online.
Okay, Chris. Chris is online, but I think Chris has, he will just be online listening. I think it's going to be handled by Marianne.
I'm here, George.
Good. One thing I want to say before Marianne starts is that she's going to take us through the articles in somewhat summary form. If you have, especially on the capital items, if you want to see some more specifics, go to the January 9th Select Board meeting, and they actually have some detail on what the initial requests are. The Select Board have not made a final decision, which I'm actually pleased at, because I would like Chris Paredes' group to get involved going over their items as we look at the entire capital budget. But Marianne will take us through the proposed town warrant articles, and then Chris Pfaff after that will take us through, or Nora will take us through the planning board articles. So Madam Select Person, I turn it over to you. And
Thank
welcome,
you.
welcome back to FinCom.
Well, thank you so much, George. Thank you for your leadership. And if I could just make a brief point of personal privilege, I want to thank all of you for your service on FinCom. As George said, I served for quite a number of years and as chair for most of them. And I think unless you've served on FinCom, you don't understand what the role is or the time commitment, the work that goes into it. Particularly as we get into town meeting season. I had the privilege of serving with George and with Jim. Great to see you both. And again, I just want to thank you in advance for your service going into town meeting. So with that, Tish, I think you're going to put up some slides for me. Thank
And
you very
Marianne, before-
much.
as he's putting those up, I want to recognize Tish. I see that we have our town council, Mr. Hearn on board, and I think I do see that Chris Coleman is listening in. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for being there with us tonight.
Great. So as George said, we're going to take you through a high-level view of the warrant articles. So next slide. The first 11, not a surprise here, are the traditional budget articles. I'll go through those in a little more detail. Next slide. And then in addition to the budget articles, there are 2 select board articles that I'll talk about in a little more detail, as well as some placeholders. So going on to the next slide, these budget articles will be presented in more detail to you at your February 14, 2023 meeting. As George indicated, they are not yet finalized. So budget articles 1 and 2 are the typical budget adjustment articles by transfer or by appropriation as may be needed. As you know, typically this may include things like snow and ice, which fortunately we haven't had too much of yet, but there still remains time for that. Next slide. Moving on, budget article 3 will be our operating budget, which is still in development. As I'm sure you're all aware, we are in a very challenging budget season with inflation. We are still waiting on a number of our fixed costs to be finalized, which includes health insurance, the Blue Hills assessment, the MWRA assessment, and we're also awaiting news from our new governor as to local aid. I understand that may be delayed because there is a new administration. So that is in development. As far as capital budget articles 4 and 5, those will represent the base capital articles for municipal and capital. As George said, we did discuss proposed municipal and school base capital at our recent meeting. So you can look at that for more detail. And I understand that your capital subcommittee will be meeting with our town administrator, Chris Coleman, and municipal department heads on February 7th. So that's great. You'll be able to get into the detail of that. Moving on, Articles 6 and 7 are the typical sewer capital articles. Sewer capital improvements, which are paid for from sewer retained earnings, as well as a sewer capital borrowing article for an inflow and infiltration program to be paid for by an MWRA loan. Moving on, in addition to our base capital, as you know, we typically have additional capital over that. Budget Article 8, I anticipate will be relative to ambulance service being paid for by ambulance receipts. And Article 9, additional capital improvements. As you know, our financial policies provide for expenditure as to maintaining our capital, and the additional capital improvements are typically paid for through funding from the meals and hotel tax. So these are all of our standard operating and capital articles. Next slide. Budget Article 10 will be the typical appropriation to our stabilization fund for fiscal year 24, and Article 11 for the OPEB liability trust fund for fiscal year 24. You may have heard at a fairly recent meeting, we had an update as to the status of OPEB, and you all should be aware of the history of FinCom delving into OPEB and the really great status that we've been able to achieve as a town with respect to our commitment to OPEB. So that's something to be proud of. So continuing on, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end. As far as select board articles, number one, we have an article with respect to the disposition of town-owned property here, 47 Willard Circle. This is property that the town owns and would like to dispose of by way of conveying it. And secondly, a home, next slide, home rule petition, which is an act creating the appointed positions of town treasurer and tax collector. This is an article that came to the select board from the Charter Review Committee on their recommendation that the positions of town treasurer, excuse me, and tax collector be made appointed positions as opposed to elected. I'm sure we will get into much more detail with you, but this was on the recommendation of the Charter Review Committee. It is in line with the vast majority of municipalities in Massachusetts and on the recommendation of the Department of Local Services. So that, and continuing on, we also have 7 placeholders to insert articles as may be needed if there are issues that come up before town meeting, which we always do. And so there are 7 miscellaneous placeholder articles. So that in brief is the overview, and I'm happy to entertain any questions folks might have. Thank you.
Oh, Jim Ferraro.
I'm back. Good to see you again, Marianne. Thank you
Hi,
for that
Jim.
presentation.
You bet.
Just a few quick questions.
Mhm.
The property that you referred to about conveying it out, when you say convey, is that going to be a sale on the open market?
That is my understanding.
Okay.
It's a, yes.
Could I just elaborate a little bit on that one?
Oh, please, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Jim, that would be the same way that we handle the Obed Baker House. We'll put an RFP together and then we will solicit bids following the state procurement law.
That's fine. I mean, I was just comparing if it's just going to be a conveyance for $1 to some other organization or something in the town. Regarding the placeholders, is there anything that's on the table that you can give us any insight on? For example, we still haven't heard anything on Hale Reservation. Is that out there? What else do you have for possible placeholders?
What I would say to you about Hale, Jim, is that that is not currently being discussed by the select board, and that it is highly unlikely that is going to be on the spring warrant.
Okay. Any other issues that the select board's been discussing that might be put into a placeholder?
As you well know, from your long service, there are things that can come up that we can't anticipate. And you know, Jim, that when I served on FinCom with you, I was very sensitive to issues coming late to FinCom. And the select board is very sensitive to that issue. I am personally very sensitive to that issue because we are aware of the work that has to be done, the due diligence that has to be done before you have to take your vote. So at this point, I do not foresee anything of major import coming down the pike. As you well know, things can come up, and that's why we have to be responsible and have those placeholders there in case something does come up. Chris?
I understand, right. I understand the unknown, but I appreciate your sensitivity. I know we had discussed that in the past, and just trying to get a little bit ahead so there aren't any last minute surprises, but not committing you to anything.
Mr. Chairman, I will tell you one of the placeholders is for a potential street acceptance, which is not unusual. There are a number of things a developer must get done before we can accept a street. We don't know if the developer will be able to get them done.
And just one final
just a couple
question.
more. Jim, just a couple more. We're still working on some matters that may have a disposition of real property. So we're not ready to identify that property as of yet. We may not be ready for town meeting, but we wanted to have that placeholder in the event things work a little bit faster.
Okay, thank you. And then as far as town budgets are concerned, I know well, everyone knows increased costs and cost overruns. To the best of your knowledge, are all the town budgets still within budget, the school department and everything? Or are we looking at any cost overruns that we'll have to address before the end of fiscal year 23?
Jim, I plan on giving an update on the Budget Steering Committee meetings I've attended, which have been 3. And I think I can address that issue. Marianne, do you want to add anything? I was just going to I was going to give an overview of some of the challenges we're dealing with.
I don't need to add anything at this time.
Jim, I'll let you know. I'll give you the best guidance I can right now based on the 3 meetings I've attended for the Budget Steering Committee to try and answer your question. Okay.
All right, we'll sum that up at the end of the meeting.
Yeah.
after-
It's actually a specific item right under the chair's update report and Budget Steering Committee meeting. I'll address it right there. Okay.
All right, we'll let everyone else present and then move forward. All right, thank you, Marianne. Thank you,
Thanks,
Chris.
Jim.
Marianne, thank you so very much. And before we go on to Chris, I want to recognize Molly Keene. Molly, I didn't see you were on, so welcome. You get a chance to see how the FinCom works. I did mention Tish and Pat. So with that, are there any other questions for Marianne? If not, thank you so very much, Madam Select Person. And we look forward to working with you. And with that, is our Nora, I know Chris Pfaff is on. Is Nora on too? Victoria, is she coming in? Victoria, I think you may be muted. Are you muted? Oh,
No.
I see Chris.
Hello.
Hi, George.
Hi, Chris. How are you? Is Nora on?
Great.
Is she gonna
I
go-
am.
Yeah, she's here.
Hi, welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I would assume, Nora, you're going to take us through your potential 5 warrant articles.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So I had sent over to Victoria, and I'm sure you all have it, copies of the short form of the planning board's hearing notice. The planning board has scheduled a public hearing on all 5 of its articles for February 7th. That'll be the initial public hearing, and they will continue it meeting to meeting. And they will come back to the Finance and Warrant Commission at your public hearings on February 28th and March 28th as well. So the first article that the planning board is considering for their hearing on the 7th is amendments to the earth material movement section of the zoning bylaw. You may recall that this earth material movement was several years ago under the Zoning Board of Appeals as a special permit approval. And that seemed too onerous. The zoning board was not interested in continuing to have those special permits. So they asked for it to be transferred to the planning board. The planning board took it over as a special permit and then eventually requested town meeting approval to reduce the level of significance from a special permit to an environmental impact and design review. And they've been conducting environmental impact design review approvals for earth material movement for several years now, and have come to the conclusion that even that seems like it's a bit of overkill. That requires a public hearing for a property owner or developer who's interested in altering their property such that they either bring in or bring off of the site at least 200 cubic yards of earth material, or they alter the grades by 5 feet or more, or have slopes of 15%. So the planning board is proposing a change to the bylaw that would allow an administrative environmental impact design review approval for this type of alteration to properties. So one of the reasons that the planning board is considering that at this time is that when we last made the changes to earth material movement to make it a planning board EIDR approval, we didn't have a stormwater bylaw that allowed the Conservation Commission to review the stormwater for all of these properties. So the planning board was trying to review both the stormwater and the actual movement of dirt. And once the Conservation Commission took over the stormwater review, that really left the planning board with regulating the trucking of the earth material on and off the site. So the planning board has been holding public hearings and they can be lengthy. But the developer, the property owner, abutters have a lot of questions, many of which pertain to the stormwater aspects, and the planning board has to direct them to the Conservation Commission. The planning boards, what they're left with is essentially the truck routes for the earth material to be moved through town. And so there are very standard conditions that are applied in each application. It takes a lot of the planning board's time right now, and it doesn't seem to be the best use of their time when those standard conditions can easily be applied in an administrative format. So that is the proposal for that article. Did you want to take questions one at a time, or would you like me to go through all 5?
I would do questions one at a time. I think it's easier, so we don't lose track of it. If that's okay with you.
That's fine. And Chris is here as well to answer any questions.
So any questions on that one?
Yeah, George, Chris Parita. So Nora, this is just taking material off of a property or adding material to a property. It's not moving material that's already there around in a different form.
So if all you're doing is moving material around and you're not increasing the change in grade by more than 5 feet or creating new steep slopes, there's no approval that's required. You're able to do that. You may have a stormwater approval before the Conservation Commission, but you would not trigger the earth material movement approval.
Okay.
Only
great,
if you're trucking in large quantities on or off the property.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, Nora, why don't you go to the next?
Sure. The next zoning article is a series of changes to the zoning bylaw that deal with sustainability. So the planning board has site plan review approval and special permit approval sections of its bylaw, all of which have sustainability requirements, but they're a little bit vague. So the planning board is looking to increase the specificity of the design guidelines that relate to sustainability. And this can be anything from energy conscious design, energy efficiency, water efficiency, renewable energy, preservation of landscaping, removal of invasives. There are several areas that they look at through the bylaw and propose changes that would require developers to take into consideration sustainability factors upfront. So there are some sections of the bylaw where this is already done. It's done in environmental impact design review, and it's done in most effectively in the University Avenue mixed use district. But the planning board is, although they have the applicants address all the standards, there are no hard and fast requirements. So the planning board's proposal is to change the standards slightly that were in a way that requires the developer to address sustainability in one form or another, or request a waiver if there are certain conditions related to their property that make those sustainability requirements not feasible.
Any questions? Okay, let's move on to the next article.
The next one has to do with dumpster enclosures. There are actually 2 articles here. One is an article that proposes amendments to the zoning bylaw, and another is an article that proposes a new section of the general bylaw. They both have to do with dumpster enclosures and the dumpsters themselves and recycling containers. So right now, dumpsters for commercial and multifamily properties are regulated by the Board of Health for their for health concerns, making sure that they're closed, that there are no vermin, that there's not trash gathering along the outside of the container. They're also regulated by the planning board under screening sections, screening requirements in a section of the bylaw. But those requirements only come into play if a commercial property or a multifamily property is coming before the board for something else. So if you want to redevelop a property, you come to the planning board and they look at all aspects of your property. And one of the things they'll look at is your dumpster and make sure that it's properly enclosed so that no one sees an open dumpster. But what's not allowed, what's not required right now, the way the bylaw is written, is that the dumpster itself has to be closed, has to have an integral top, a lid on it to make sure that dumpster materials don't flow out, to make sure that rainwater doesn't get in and cause leakage and seepage of environmentally sensitive materials into the ground. So this would update the zoning bylaw requirements to make sure that dumpsters and the dumpster enclosures are properly addressed. But then it also adds Planning Board Article 5, it adds a general bylaw that would come into play with all dumpsters in commercial or multifamily residential properties, even existing ones. So we kind of have an inconsistency around town right now where properties that have been renovated, that have had to go to the planning board for approval of exterior alterations, have up-to-date dumpster enclosures, and they're well cared for and well maintained. And then we have some other properties that haven't been before the planning board for recent renovations, that have had dumpsters for many, many years, and many of those are just out in the open, just sitting on the parking lot and kind of migrating from area to area without enclosure. So the purpose of the general bylaw that the planning board is considering, and they'll discuss further at their public hearing, would be to regulate all dumpsters on commercial or non-residential or multifamily residential properties throughout the town, whether they exist or not, whether they're coming before the planning board for any approval or not, they would still have to maintain their dumpsters, empty them according to regular hours. Right now, we have a general bylaw that restricts retail businesses from emptying their dumpsters at certain hours of the day. And I believe it also restricts restaurants, but it doesn't restrict anyone else. So if you have a business that does not fall into either retail or restaurant, you can empty your dumpster at 3 a.m. and there's nothing your neighbors can do about it. So this would add a little bit more consistency.
All right, Nora, Chris Parita again. What's missing from these two articles is the town itself. You mentioned commercial properties and multifamily residential properties, but some of the worst offenders, in my experience, are the schools. So why don't we consider having the town itself follow its own guidelines?
Yeah, so I think the way that the current draft that the planning board's looking at right now, I'll have to check on it, but I believe it says non-residential and multifamily residential. So that non-residential would take into consideration not just commercial, but institutional as well, including the town. But I will double check to make sure that is how we worded it. I believe it is.
Good point. Other questions? So your last one is your housekeeping article?
The last one's housekeeping. So as anyone who's served on this board before knows, we go through the bylaw year after year, and there's always something that comes up. There are always several little inconsistencies, typographical errors, often number inconsistencies that come up throughout the year. And we take note of them and just put them into a housekeeping article. So the planning board will have several of those minor changes as well. None of which change the effect of the bylaw, but they just correct inconsistencies and errors.
Thank you. I have one question for either Chris or Nora. Any update on what I call the MBTA filing we've done with the state? Have we had any response yet?
So we have not had a response to the previous filing that we made. We are due to make another filing before the end of January. What we're filing now is our plan of compliance.
Okay.
And the planning board made a decision that they would file their plan of compliance to be what we have done so far.
Okay.
They will take the position that the town has adopted a district of reasonable size that allows by right use for multifamily housing within half a mile of a train station. The size of that district is about 16.5 acres, whereas the Department of Housing and Community Development's guidelines dictate that Westwood needs as much as 50 acres. The planning board is taking the position that the law itself says a district of reasonable size, and they believe that they have adopted it. So I will be filing our action plan in the next week or so, and that's exactly what it'll say, that the board proposed and town meeting approved, and the Attorney General's office has now approved a mixed-use multifamily residential zone within half a mile of a MBTA station, and that is how we intend to comply with the law.
And
there are no further expansions of that district proposed at this time.
do we have any idea on their timing when they'll get back to us, Nora or Chris? Because it also affects the potential developer of the site, correct? On Endicott Street?
Well, the Attorney General's office has gotten back to us with our zoning amendment, and they have approved the zoning amendment. What we
Okay.
haven't heard is whether the Department of Housing and Community Development will find the town to be in compliance with their guidelines. I suspect they will not, that they will say that we don't have 50 acres, we're not in compliance. But that's a matter for the town council and the planning board and the select board then to take up. If and when there are any punishments that come down for failure to comply with the guidelines.
Okay, but do you think the developer will still want to have a clarification from communities and development, or will the Attorney General ruling be sufficient for the developer to go ahead?
The developer will go ahead based on the zoning. The zoning has been
Okay.
approved and is now in effect.
Okay, thank you. Oops, Chris, do you see? Oh, George.
George Laham had his hand up.
Yeah, I just had one question, Nora. I know we seem to be spending some time discussing it. I'm just curious, how many multi-families or multi-units do we actually have in Westwood?
Well, we have 350 apartments at the Gables Residential, University Station. We have 100 condominiums also at University Station. We have 18 condominiums in Islington Center, along with 12 single bedroom apartments in Islington Center. We also have a 9-unit property, I think it's 405 Washington Street.
Yeah,
And then
right
we have-
across from the Duncans.
Yes, and then we have the Colburn School Building has six 2-bedroom units on High Street. And then we have a few 3 families, and I think we have 2 4 families in town. And that's the extent of our multifamily housing.
How many two? I think we have a few more 2 families, but I
2 families are not considered multifamily. So it's single family, 2 family, and the multifamily is 3 units or more.
okay. So the bulk of it is the apartments at Legacy and Gables.
At
University.
University Station, and yes, Gables and the condos, that's the vast majority. That's 450 units, and the total of all the other units, I think, adds up to fewer than 50.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, both Chris and Nora, thank you so very much for attending, and look forward to seeing you as we proceed with our deliberations.
Great. And if anyone's interested in the planning board hearing, you want to join us on February 7th, please tune in.
That would be excellent. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, George. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so the next agenda item is I wanted to give a report on the Budget Steering Committee meetings and actually address the question that Jim Ferrara raised. I have attended 3 Budget Steering Committee meetings, and they consist of the Superintendent of School, the school's Director of Administration and Finance, the Town Administrator, our new Director of Finance, and myself and the Chair of the Select Board. And to reiterate what Marianne LeBlanc said, we have some real challenges. And I will mention a few of them for you. And on behalf of both the schools and the town, every effort is being made to bring these budgets within our available funding. And I know you're all familiar with that chart where we show available revenue and building in new growth, et cetera. But it's going to be a very, very tight year. On the school side, Chapter 766 and transportation costs associated with that we have some significant increases. And as you know, those are really out of the control of the town. If several families move into town with their IEP plans, we are obligated to honor those plans. And if they require out of school, out of town placements, we have to honor those. I think in the presentation that the director of our Chapter 766 programs made to us, I think it was maybe 2 months ago, we worked diligently, the school works diligently to hopefully convince these families to let us service them in town. But we really are subject to, the legal requirements. There are also some significant increase in transportation costs that we don't have control over, that the state has mandated the transportation of these students. They have inflationary costs and they have significant fuel increases. If you go back and look at the school committee's presentation at a 5.5% increase, that would have been about a $2.9 million increase, pretty much over what our available funds are. The school has made a recommendation to the school committee to come in at more like about 4.5%. And I think Victoria sent out a notification today that the recommendations are now available in town hall. So I would strongly recommend that, especially the education subcommittee, Bill Bruce, Mike Gay, Sean Weller, and Renee Gauthier, get copies of those books. You can pick them up at town hall. If for any reason you can't get them, I would ask to get in touch with Victoria, and I would request that they be mailed out to you. Okay, I've read the document. It's extremely well written, and it addresses some of the challenges they're attempting to deal with. The other thing to mention is they have built in some assumptions about contract negotiations, but the school contract for the teachers is not resolved. So that is also an outlier, although they built in assumptions to cover us part way. On the municipal side, we also have challenges, the same inflationary fuel costs. And I'll give you an example. When we first look at the pension assessment from Norfolk County, the first estimate we got was a 10% increase. That would have cost us almost $500,000. And we were very much taken aback. It turns out that we're only going to be dealing with a 1.7% increase, and literally will eliminate about $500,000 of that potential increase. We're also waiting for, I think as Marianne mentioned, information from the Group Insurance Commission, the Blue Hills assessment, and our MWRA assessment. So we sort of got a lot out there. My observations there, people are working extremely hard on both the school and on the municipal side to bring these budgets in. But right now, it's still a question mark. A lot of work has to be done. So I think our respective education subcommittees and our two municipal committees, one is the Public Safety Committee and the other one is looking at the municipal side, really are going to have to jump in and be comfortable with the recommendation budgets that come in. The other thing to mention is on the public safety side, I believe the fire and the majority of the police contracts are also not resolved. So it is a bit of a challenging time, for towns. And what I'm also hearing is we're not alone. I mean, a lot of other towns are facing these same challenges that we are. So I think we have a lot of work in front of us. And therefore, I think we're going to rely very heavily on our education subcommittee and our two municipal committees to really delve into these budgets. So that's pretty much my report. I have been impressed, to be honest with you, the effort that everybody has put in to try and come up with a balanced budget. And my own personal feeling is we will probably get close to, or we will reach a balanced budget, but it's going to require a lot of work. What questions can I answer for you? Okay, good. So I will keep you updated. Let's see, the other thing I wanted to address is the mentor assignments. I think both myself and Chris Pareda and Michael Gay have volunteered to serve as mentors, which I think has been a program that has worked out fairly well. The other thing I wanted to ask you is Mike Gay made a recommendation, what I thought was excellent. And in addition to the mentors, are there any onboarding ideas or thoughts you have, especially from new members from last year and this year? If you have any thoughts or suggestions on what we should make available, like an onboarding package, would you send that information to Victoria? Because I would be interested in putting something together so we can sort of have a standard package we give to our new members who come on board, maybe take some of the mystique out about joining the FinCom. George Loughnane, I may have missed your question.
It was just a question of everything you said I know is going to be very helpful, and I'm eagerly anticipating and hoping that it comes to fruition. But if you had to pick a date on a dartboard on a calendar, when do you think the subcommittees are going to get those budgets so that we have time to look at them before we actually meet so that we can speak intelligently on them?
Okay, well, we know that on the capital side, because we've restructured how we address capital, the entire capital budget, including all the items that Marianne LeBlanc mentioned. Chris Pareda, I forgot, is it the February 6th or 7th?
She
Okay,
mentioned February 7th.
Yeah, so that, and I think Jim Ferrara and Lauren are on that committee, and they will be meeting with and taking care of those issues. I think the school committee meets on this Thursday evening, and we will find out, does the school committee vote in favor of the recommendations made by the superintendent? That budget of information is available at Town Hall, as Victoria mentioned. So that data you can get. My sense is, I think Chris mentioned, I apologize, I don't remember the specific date, but they're setting, I think it's February 14th, to have their final budget submissions into us on the municipal side. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was February 14th. They're going to make that presentation to us.
They're gonna make it on Valentine's Day to us.
Yeah, with a big red bow wrapped around it, okay?
I'm just throwing that out there. I'd like to stay married. I mean, it's just a thought for me, but
Well,
so.
yeah. Yeah.
So the 9 different budgets that fall under the municipal administration, we're gonna hopefully get them by February 14th. And then we're gonna be able to have a presentation so we can have maybe a day to look at them.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
before.
I think the calendar gives you sufficient time. You don't, Victoria, when are the subcommittee reports done?
March 14th.
Yeah, so you have, okay, yeah, you have sufficient time. And I
Yeah.
think the fact that we split it up, everybody will get involved, but I think you have sufficient time. The good news is we'll know where we stand on the capital budget. That will be done. It gives us just a chance to focus on the operating budget.
I just do want to throw that out there for those who would like to stay married. February 14th might not be the best day to have a 3-hour meeting. Just
Okay, well,
throwing it out there.
Okay, we'll take a look at it. Okay, when's our next meeting? Victoria,
January 31st.
right? And then,
It's February 14th.
well, we'll provide the we'll provide the candy. Okay, we'll figure that out.
Just
All right.
the rosé, that would be lovely.
Okay, all right. With that, let me ask, first of all, are there any other questions on any issue we discussed tonight from FinCom members before I ask if there's any public questions? I see a couple of hands. Oh my gosh, Chris, I'll let you be the.
Sean Weller.
And I think Jim's hand came up before mine, so I don't.
Yep.
Well,
want
there's no priority. Go ahead. I think you
Okay.
actually raised your hand
It was in
visibly.
circling back to what George, you brought up when providing the update from the Budget Steering Committee meeting. You mentioned that other towns or municipalities are going through these challenges as well. And that seems very evident. I'm wondering if you've heard any information or if you have a sense of how we can find information on how other towns are confronting these challenges.
I will ask the town finance director if she has any of that information for us, okay? One thing you raised an interesting point, Sean. I think ultimately, I hope that, and Chairman Gotti mentioned this in one of our steering committee meetings, at some point in time, the state is going to have to step up its financial support of Chapter 766. It is starting to hit towns beyond a lot of local towns' capability to fund a very, very important program, but it's a very expensive program. And I think he has spoken to a couple of our representatives, and it's starting to become an issue now. But I will ask Stephanie when I see her at the next committee meeting if we can get that information, okay?
Thank you, much appreciated.
Okay.
Jim Farrar.
Thank you. George, I'm just going totally in different direction. In the past, I've had to abstain from voting for minutes because I was late or not present in the meeting. If one watches the meeting at a later time, does that make him or her eligible to vote on the minutes at a successive meeting?
Jim, that's an interesting point. And I think what we will have to do is ask Pat Ahern that question. So what you're basically saying, if for some reason you cannot attend a meeting, but you then view the entire meeting online or after the fact, that's a very interesting question.
Or
Yeah,
even a portion of the meeting, as Jim said, he has
Yeah.
abstained because he missed the first 20 minutes.
Yeah, I would like to say yes, because I understand that, we are a volunteer board, and if for some reason you have observations to make on the minutes, I certainly would appreciate that input. I will actually talk to Pat Ahern personally about that, okay?
Okay, I'm just throwing that out there.
No, I
No
think
worries.
it's a very valid point, especially, if you're 10 minutes late, you miss the roll call, I think it's important.
Yeah, George, there's two issues here. I think Jim has identified one. So, and you brought up another one. So, yeah, listening to the meeting would certainly give you the ability to let George know if you have any comments on what should be in the minutes. George will circulate the minutes to both I and Victoria. Or Victoria will circulate the minutes to both I and George. But if you've listened to the meeting, that doesn't preclude you from commenting on what you think should be in the minutes.
Yeah.
That's a different issue than voting. And I agree with George that we need to get Pat Ahern to opine on whether or not you could still vote.
Chris,
I know that he has previously told me that if you miss a meeting, you can listen to it. It's a Zoom meeting. You can listen to it online. That doesn't preclude you from voting on the topic. But I don't know about the minutes.
Chris, will you do me a favor, since you are an attorney, will you take this on with Pat Ahern, ask him about it? Speaking of minutes, that's one thing we need to do is to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Now, does anybody have any questions or comments on the minutes from the last meeting? Okay, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes from the December meeting.
May I get a second?
Second.
Okay, I guess we have to go through the roll call, Victoria, correct? So let's do the roll call in the minutes.
Bill,
Abstain.
John,
Aye.
Jim,
Yes.
Lauren,
Yes.
Renee,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
George Hertz,
Yes.
Angela,
yes,
Caitlin,
Yes.
George Loughnane,
Yes.
George Morone,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
Chris Peretta,
Yes.
and Sean.
Yes.
Thank you. Minutes are approved. One thing I'd like to say is I think Victoria's done an excellent job on the initial drafts of the minutes she sends to Chris Pareda and I. We both review them, but I think we've gotten very, very good at our minutes. And I think it does really very nicely reflect the discussions that we've had. But I also, I would reiterate what Chris Pareda said is input is extremely important. So I want to make sure we at least are able to get your input and questions. If you've watched the meeting, whether or not you can vote on them, I'll ask Chris to clarify with town council. So with that, are there any questions from the press and the public? Seeing none, can I entertain a
There's a
motion?
question.
Okay, oh, yes, there's a question.
Yes. So Kathy Sullivan, she said that she's concerned about the Westwood Fire Department having enough staff and equipment. It seems that we rely on the recall system, which the chief himself says does not work. Will they get a budget to address these shortfalls? I'm also concerned that the schools took $2 million of their rainy day to put in contingency on the school building project. Will that money come back to the budget if not needed for the building project? The town also took $1 million in COVID relief money to put into the school building project. That $3 million could be put to good use in this budget.
All right, let me do this. First of all, did the person that, who was the person again, please?
Kathy Sullivan?
And did she put her address in? We have her address?
No, we do not.
Well, we really are supposed to have the address. Name and address to confirm they're a Westwood resident.
283 Farm Lane, George.
Okay, all right, let me do this. Let me address a couple of the questions. In terms of the, first of all, Marianne LeBlanc is not here, so I cannot respond for Marianne. The only thing I can say is, as she said, it was a recommendation that came from the Charter Commission. So I really think that would have to be a question directed to her as a select person, since she is not really here. On the two other items, the $2 million that the school allocated for the new Deerfield Hamlin School project, those were funds that came from University Station developer, and the school held them in reserve. And in order to sufficiently fund the budget and reduce to keep it within available funds, they committed that $2 million to that capital program. Those funds will not be coming back to the town. They will be spent as part of the school project. The $1 million, I don't remember the exact number, but it was part of the negotiations the select board did with Norfolk County, who controlled the release of COVID-related funds, and it had to be for a specific component of the project. And that was really between negotiations between the select board and and Norfolk County, and those funds have been committed for the construction. For the construction of the school. So the 2 million and the 1 million, I really have become part of the entire budget for the Hamlin Deerfield School. That's to the best of my knowledge.
George, let me add that I know in years past, we have asked the school if they would want to use that quote rainy day fund unquote that they got from Westwood Station in circumstances where they could have easily have done so, and they said no, we want to hold it for when we really need it. So I have to believe that they think this year they really need to use those funds.
Well, Chris, to build upon your point, it was necessary to meet the budget, that we had for the school. So I think it was, the good news is it was wonderful funding made available from the whole development of University Station. And it was probably, as you said, it was held in reserve and used it probably for a very appropriate project. Hopefully that answers the question. Anything else? Okay, with that, I think did we get our motion to adjourn? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
A second?
Second.
Okay, would you kindly take the roll call, Victoria?
Bill,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Lauren,
Yes.
Renee,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
George Hertz,
Yes.
Angela,
Yes.
Caitlin.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes.
George Loughnane,
Yes.
George Marone,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
Chris Peretta,
Yes.
and Sean.
Yes.
Okay, thank you all very much. Have a very happy new year to all of you. And I look forward to all the work you're going to do in your subcommittees, and meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks. Good night.